Hi, I'm Eugene and welcome back to the devlog of Kindle in the Dark. My goal was to create a navigation system like this war of mine, where when the player clicks on a certain point, the character automatically calculates the path and moves toward it. It took me a lot longer than I expected to figure out how to implement this. After trying out different options, I settled with the A-Star Grid 2D node in Godot. A-Star Grid 2D is a specialized navigation node for 2D grids. By registering the region and the cell size, it automatically creates points that can be used for pathfinding. In my case, I created a navigation layer that shows the navigation points. Then at the beginning, I went through each tile of the tile map and checked if the tile was in the navigation layer. If it wasn't in the navigation layer, I set the tile solid, excluding it from the available points for pathfinding. The path needs to add vertical paths in some cases, like climbing up and down a ladder. To achieve this, I created a layer called Navigatable Objects. This layer contains the points that are not available for pathfinding by default, but can be available under certain circumstances. When one of the icons are clicked or the destination is on a different level from the current position, the tile map unsolids these points, and the path is calculated with the updated navigation area. When the player reaches the destination, the tile map sets the navigatable points back to solid again. The resulting path from the A-Star Grid 2D node is an array of vector 2i that are the coordinates of the tile map to follow from the current position. To move the player along this path, I wrote a code that checks the current coordinate and the next coordinate in the path array, and calculates the vector of the player's movement. Then I added physics to the player's movement to make it look less floaty and more natural. Most of the bugs came from here. The first problem I encountered was that the player couldn't move diagonally upward. It just bounced between the tiles and got stuck. When the player first moves diagonally, the initial vector is +/- 1, -1. However, when it enters the next tile, the vector turns to +/- 1, 0, which means gravity is applied and the player falls back to the previous tile. So the player repeats entering the next tile and falling back to the previous tile. For a similar reason, the player would also extremely slow down when they move down from an edge. The initial vector is +/- 1, 1. Then, when the player enters the next tile, the vector turns to 0, 1. With the horizontal velocity turning to 0, the player falls off the edge extremely slowly. To fix this, I first made a dictionary that stores the player's state. If state.moveUp is true and the vector is +/- 1, 0, the player is in mid-air of the jump. If state.moveDown is true and the vector is 0, 1, the player is falling off. When either of these happens, I made either the vertical or horizontal velocity gradually decline instead of dropping straight down to 0. Except for the fall trajectory to be straight, I made the absolute value of the horizontal velocity to decrease but stay 0 when it becomes 0, so that the direction is maintained and not reversed in midair. You may have noticed that the player's final position doesn't really match with the mouse click position. This is because the player stops right after it enters the final tile. So it stops when it is halfway through the final tile, regardless of the actual position of the mouse click. To make the extra mile, I added a code that calculates the direction toward the mouse click position when it enters the final tile, and sets the player's velocity accordingly. I also made the player to detect edges. It can prevent the player from falling off edges, but the biggest reason was to later add cool slide animations. When the player enters the last tile of the path, it calls the isOnEdge function. The function checks 1. If the last tile is an edge tile and the direction of the edge, and 2. If the player is moving off the center of the tile for a certain pixel. If the isOnEdge function returns true and the player is still moving toward the mouse click position, the horizontal velocity is slowed and reversed. The target position, which was originally the mouse click position, is also updated to fit inside the final tile. And this is the final version here. Of course, I've done a lot more to achieve this, but I had to cut off a lot of the details to fit in the video. The full story is in my recent blog post, so I recommend checking out the link in the description. The next thing to do is to add items and new interactions, which also means new animations. I've started with creating the animations first, including a new sprite sheet for the player, and it's not easy. What the hell? If you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe. I'll see you in my next video. Bye!